Hello and welcome once again to the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy it. And once again, I find myself talking about current events, even though most of you who have been following me for a while realize that there are some very important videos that I should be making instead. I'll get back to those and release them to the public as soon as possible. However, what I have to talk about today is much more pressing considering the situation that we find ourselves in. It is my hope that everyone who hears what I am about to say experiences a feeling of calm. There is no reason for those who are informed about what is happening to be apprehensive. We are experiencing things that the prophets of old spoke about, but were never able to experience themselves. We as a people are more blessed today than anyone from any other time in human history. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 8 through 12 says this about the situation of those who fled Judea at the time of its destruction. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are obtaining the outcome of your faith and the salvation of your souls. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about this grace that is now yours searched and inquired carefully. And at Matthew chapter 13 and verse 7, Jesus had this to say, "For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous men long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." As wonderful as it may have been to witness Jesus performing miracles and speaking to the crowds, I can promise you that what we are about to experience will be much more wonderful. The salvation that mankind has been awaiting is getting close. Events that are taking place right now will conclude with the end of human suffering forever. What I am about to tell you may not seem to be related to our current situation, but I promise you that it very much is. In the first century, when Jesus was walking the earth, performing miracles, the miracles that he performed had a profound effect on those who witnessed them. At some point in his ministry, a man named Nicodemus, who was a high-ranking leader in first century Judean society, sneaked over to visit him in order to find out how he was able to perform such powerful works. After asking Jesus about the secret of his amazing abilities, Jesus revealed that he had been born again. He then went on to explain that when the resurrection of the dead takes place, everyone will be able to do the things that he was doing. I know that most people who have read these verses have a completely different understanding as to what they mean, but that is by design. All religions earthwide have been under the direct control of Satan from the very beginning. Even the basic concept of religion was created by Satan. With Jesus' response to Nicodemus comes a very obvious question about something else that the churches have been hiding. When and where did Jesus live prior to his birth in the first century? In the near future, I will be producing a video about that subject. In the meantime, just know this: according to the Bible, prior to Jesus' birth in the first century, he lived another life and accomplished something that no man had ever done before, which would prove to be every bit as significant as anything that he did after he was born again. After Jesus' death, the Holy Spirit was able to impart powers into Jesus' disciples that were similar to the powers that he himself wielded. None of those men and women had to die and be born again in order to attain their miraculous abilities. Another verse that the churches of Christianity have been lying about involves this very same subject. At 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 and 52, we are told, "Behold, I shall reveal a mystery to you. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For when the trumpet sounds, all of the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we shall be changed." According to this verse, some will experience a physical change as they are brought back to life, while others experience a physical change without even dying. Even though Jesus told Nicodemus that he would have to be born again in order to acquire the powers that he was asking about, the Bible made it clear that others would be able to acquire those powers without ever dying at all. Jesus may have been alluding to this concept at John chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, as he was speaking to a woman named Martha. "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believe in me shall never die at all." There are several resurrections of dead people recorded in the Bible, not just the resurrection of Jesus. But there are no verses in the Bible about those people performing miracles. Even though Jesus taught that everyone who died would eventually be born again, he did not hide the fact that some would be able to do the things that he did without having to die. John chapter 14 and verse 12 records Jesus making this promise. "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father." The activities of the apostles, as recorded in the Bible, prove that Jesus' promise was true, but that promise was apparently not for everyone. Those who claim to be able to perform miracles such as faith healing in our day are most likely lying. It might seem confusing that some who come back to life in the flesh seem to have miraculous abilities while others do not. Some were very obviously resurrected in their original intact bodies, while Jesus was born again from a woman named Mary. Ezekiel chapter 37 speaks of dry bones coming back to life. Some believe that when Jesus was resurrected, he came back to life in his first century body, as is evidenced by Thomas being able to place his hand in the wound left by the soldier at his execution. However, the fact that he was walking around with a fatal wound might suggest that, in fact, Jesus was not in his original body, but in some kind of body that was not affected by fatal wounds. Although this may all seem confusing, the Bible clearly states that some deaths are not the same as other deaths, and some resurrections are not the same as other resurrections. Revelation chapter 20 and verse 6 says, "Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years." Obviously, if you have done any research in the Bible, you have come across this verse and wondered what it meant. If you looked into any of the teachings of mankind's religions, you may have been confused even more. Here are some very basic concepts that are found in the Bible that most religions apparently are not aware of. People who are not alive are dead. People who are dead are not alive, at least not alive in the flesh. When someone is born again, it means that this is not their first time to be born. And I imagine that a person could be called dead again if, in fact, they had been born, lived out their life, died, came back to life somehow, and then died a second time. The concepts of life, death, and resurrection as found in our Bibles are not much different than our modern understanding of such concepts. An important detail about the verses that record Jesus' reply to Nicodemus is that in ancient Greek, Jesus did not actually say that he had been born again. The true Greek words recorded at John chapter 3 and verse 3 actually mean born from above or created new by God. The concepts of being recreated or reborn or changed can be found in several places in the Bible. The translators seemingly decided to render this verse as born again based on the response of Nicodemus in verse 4. Nicodemus said to him, "How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born?" Obviously, Nicodemus was confused by Jesus' explanation for his miraculous abilities. His question about an old man having to return to his mother's womb indicates that his understanding of the Greek word for born was the same as our understanding of the English word born. Nicodemus may also have been confused by the fact that Jesus was speaking of performing miracles after being born, even though Nicodemus was not aware of any miracles performed by Jesus as a child. Since Nicodemus was probably wanting to find out how he could acquire such powers, he may have wanted some kind of way to become a miracle worker himself without having to die. Hence, asking how he could be born again as an old man. There are actually two possible times when Jesus could have received his miraculous powers. The first time would have been at his conception, when the Holy Spirit placed the life of Jesus into his mother, Mary. And the second time being when the Holy Spirit came down on Jesus at his baptism. We all know that Jesus was performing miracles before his death and resurrection. The first miracle of Jesus recorded in the Bible was the turning of water into wine at a wedding feast, which did not take place until after his baptism. Based on this, many believe that Jesus did not gain his abilities until after his baptism. Since the Bible never says that the turning of water into wine was his first miracle, there really isn't any reason to put our faith in this teaching. It also must be noted that several ancient texts, including the Quran, say that Jesus did perform miracles prior to his baptism. In any case, many other verses, such as John chapter 8 and verse 58, confirm that Jesus had lived another life prior to his birth in the first century. Just so that everyone understands, Jesus lived a life prior to his birth in the first century. Jesus lived in the first century, was tortured to death, and brought back to life once again. So Jesus actually claimed to life on earth on at least 3 separate occasions. The reason that this concept is so important today is because even though the Bible recorded no other examples of dead people being born again, there is ample reason to believe that Jesus' second birth may not be as unique as we think. Most people believe that the Bible is an instruction book for how to achieve some kind of heavenly reward. I promise you that it is not. The Bible is simply a recorded history of the war between good and evil, between the righteous angels and the wicked angels. This war could also be thought of as the war between creation and civilization, or the war between God's kingdom and Satan's empire. 2 of the most prominent characters involved in this war are obviously Jesus and Satan. If we can believe that Jesus returned to earth by being born of a virgin in the first century, then it is not that far-fetched to believe that Satan himself could be somehow returned to life as a physical being. In fact, just as many believe that Jesus has been present in earth's affairs from the very beginning, many believe that Satan has been involved in earth's affairs as well. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 19 puts it this way. We know that we come from God, but we also know that civilization is under the power of the wicked one. The means by which Satan has been controlling human society for all these thousands of years isn't explained in great detail. However, it should be obvious to anyone who has spent any time on this planet that something is seriously wrong with the way that humans behave. Several passages of the Bible speak of men being influenced by wicked spirits through something called demon possession. The Bible also contrasts the difference that exists between those who are filled with the Holy or clean Spirit and those who are filled with a wicked or unclean spirit. How that relates to being born again is not clear. Many people believe that someone called the Antichrist is about to make an appearance and achieve some prominent position in human society. The religious beliefs associated with this person are so deeply ingrained and in many cases irrational that I usually avoid speaking of it. However, current events seem to indicate that now is the time to address this issue. The word Antichrist simply means against Christ. This word is only used in the books of 1 John and 2 John. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18 says, "Children, it is the last hour, and just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour." The first use of the word is singular and would be more properly translated into English as the Antichrist, as opposed to simply translating it into Antichrist without the definite article the. However, the second use of the word in this passage is plural. The way that John presents the information in this verse does not highlight any significant difference between the Antichrist and any of the other Antichrist. In other words, as written, John describes the Antichrist in the same way as all of the other individuals referred to as Antichrists. In any case, John's use of the singular form and his mentioning that people were speaking of a specific Antichrist is an indication that at least one Antichrist would stand out in some way as unique. This verse was recorded in the Bible just a few years after Jesus died. So we need to ask ourselves if the Antichrist was born again at that time. 1 John chapter 4 and 3 makes it seem as if this was not the case. "And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not of God. And this is that of the Antichrist, which you heard that is coming, and now is already in the world." Here John speaks of the Antichrist at that time as a spirit. In other words, people who were acting against Christ in John's day were not necessarily followers of someone that had returned from the grave, but simply people who were being influenced by the spirit of the Antichrist. Even though the verses written by John don't support the idea that Satan existed in the flesh during the first century, and they can't be used as absolute proof that Satan would exist in the flesh at some future time, there are quite a few verses about a single individual who would deceive mankind as civilization neared its end. And those verses cannot be denied. I'm now going to summarize what is written at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verses 1 through 12. it would be a really good idea if you would look at or listen to these verses in their entirety to confirm for yourself that what I am telling you is accurate. The things that I am about to say may seem different from what you see in your own copy of the Bible, but can easily be checked simply by comparing the original ancient language text against what I am about to read to you. Now, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to Him, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or by a spoken word or by something seemingly written by us, leading you to believe that the day of the Lord has arrived. Let no one deceive you in any way, because the day of the Lord will not come until the rejection of basic truth comes first, and the lawless human is revealed, the child of destruction who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be a God. You know that he is currently being restrained so that he may be revealed when it is the proper time for that to take place. This mystery of lawlessness is already at work. The one who now holds it back will continue to do so until the time is right. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the spirit of his mouth and bring to nothing by his very conspicuous presence. This lawless presence will be according to Satan's energy, with all of his power and false signs and wonders, and with all of his wicked deception to use on those who are going to die because they refuse to love the truth which would have saved them. It is only through God that they are able to convince themselves of such nonsense, to believe in things that are false, in order that all who are pleased with injustice may expose themselves for what they are. Before I go on, I want to address some questions that are going to come up about these verses. Many religions teach that these verses are not about an individual, but about wickedness in general. At least one religion that I have been involved with says that the subject of these passages is not an individual, but a particular religion or group of religions. The basis for these beliefs is the fact that most of the Greek words that are translated as he or him could easily be translated as she, they, or it. And in like manner, the words that are translated as man could easily be translated as one. In other words, the passages about a man of lawlessness might be better translated as lawlessness in general, lawless one, singular, or lawless ones, plural. For years, I struggled with trying to figure out the proper translation of all of the ancient text. And in fact, most of the passage seems to be just as some religions teach. However, all of the verses here are obviously about the same subject, and in verse 3, that subject is clearly identified as the human of lawlessness and the child of destruction. Verse 9 further identifies this lawless human as Satan himself. Any English translation of the Bible that does not clearly reveal this vital information is inaccurate. Hopefully, everyone that is listening to this information understands this concept of Satan being deceptive. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 and 14 says, "It is no wonder that religious people keep masquerading as apostles of Christ. After all, Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." That being said, we have to be careful about trying to outguess Satan. But with a clear understanding of how he has behaved in the past, we can draw a few conclusions about any identifying behaviors that he might exhibit should he return in the flesh. As the verses we just read say, he opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship so that he takes the seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be a God. That being the case, we have to understand that Satan would very obviously try to convince mankind that he is a God by doing things that people would expect God to do. When the nation of Israel was rescued from Egyptian bondage, God offered them the opportunity to live by natural law, and with his own hand carved into stone what we today call the Ten Commandments. But as most of us know, the nation rejected God's law, and after Moses pleaded with God not to exterminate his people, God allowed Moses to give them a replacement law. Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 11 and 25 explains what happened. I led them out of the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness and gave them my statutes and made known to them my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. Moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes, but rejected my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. And my Sabbaths they greatly profaned. Because they had not obeyed my rules, but had rejected my statutes, and profaned my Sabbaths, and their eyes were set on their fathers' idols, moreover, I gave them statutes that were not good, and rules by which they could not have life. God only gave the Israelites two sets of laws. The set of laws that he consistently referred to as my rules, my laws, and my statutes are what we today call the Ten Commandments. The law by which no man could have life is what we today call the law of Moses. It is the law of Moses that has become the basis for every human law that exists today. Most nations have incorporated laws similar to the laws of Moses into their legal systems. In like manner, most religions also have rules similar to the law of Moses. It could be said that every nation on earth is ruled by statutes that are not good and rules by which people cannot have life. In the secular world, harsh laws that do not benefit mankind are called Draconian laws. The mythology that is the basis for this title tell of a man named Draco, who was asked by the leaders of Greece to create a constitution that would bring order to society. This supposedly happened thousands of years ago. The word Draco appears in several ancient language texts of the Bible at verses such as Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. When the book of Revelation was written, the language of the Roman Empire was Latin. When Jesus was executed, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate had his conviction written up in 3 languages and affixed to the beam that Jesus was nailed to. One of those languages was Latin, the official language of the Roman Empire. The Latin word for dragon is Draco. In fact, the ancient version of the Bible known as the Latin Vulgate renders Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9 not to say that the great dragon was cast out, but instead to say that the great Draco was cast out. All laws that exist in our day are draconian in nature. All come from Draco, the great dragon, the one called devil and Satan. All draconian laws are based on and similar in some way to the law of Moses. The first law given to the Israelites, the 10 Commandments, required an observance of the Sabbath. Once every 7 days, God's people were required to cease, desist, or rest from their works. But as the Bible clearly states, the Israelites profaned God's Sabbaths. The second law given to the Israelites required that they rest on the Sabbath day, but also required them to rest during every Sabbath year. In other words, according to the replacement law that we call the Law of Moses, the Israelites were required by that law to cease, desist, or rest for an entire year once every 7 years. In our day, a year taken off from work is called a sabbatical. Another requirement of the second law was that the Israelites cease, desist, or rest once every 7th cycle of 7 years cycles, and to do so for 2 years. In other words, at the beginning of every 49th year, the Israelites by law had to stop working for 2 whole years. In the Bible, the Israelites were told that they would have to trust in Jehovah God to care for their needs during both the 1-year sabbatical and during the 2-year cycle, which we today call a Jubilee. The original words that get translated into the words Jehovah God are actually Yehovah Elohim. The words Jehovah Elohim or Yehovah Elohim, when accurately translated into English, mean the gods to be. Keep in mind that the Bible clearly states that God first gave man the good law, but that when they rejected the good law, He gave them the laws by which no man could live. The sabbatical law and the Jubilee law were both part of that second law by which no man could live. The second law not only told people what they could and could not do, it also prescribed punishments to be inflicted upon those who did not obey those laws. Currently, mankind as a whole is once again being subjected to a wicked version of what is quickly becoming a universal Sabbath. Unlike those of us who are being forced to endure the current economic shutdown, those who observed the earlier sabbaticals and jubilees were never told that they had to stop working in order to control the spread of an illness. When the Israelites were given the law of Moses, they by law had to cease, desist, or rest from all necessary activity or face judicial punishment. In our day, we are being told that we must cease, desist, or rest from all unnecessary activity or face judicial punishment. So far, there is only one real difference between our current Sabbath and that prescribed by the law of Moses. The Israelites were told in advance when the Sabbath would begin and how long it would last. We were not prepared in any way for this current version of the Sabbath. And so far, we are not being told about how long this Sabbath is going to last. If Satan's current Sabbath is going to be the same as the Sabbath that was included in the law of Moses, we can figure out exactly how long to expect it to last. But there really aren't any details in the Bible about Satan's current version of the law. For the most part, we are simply going to have to wait and see how things work out. If this Sabbath runs its course in a way that is similar to that prescribed by the law of Moses, we will be much better equipped to determine what Satan's empire has planned for us next. However, it would seem that our current Sabbath began at roughly the same time as the ancient version. All of mankind's religions are associated with some kind of cyclical calendar of rituals. All have been marked by the observance of the earth's 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. The holiest days of nearly every religion that currently exists, as well as every ancient religion of the past, have always been associated with the timing of the spring equinox. Around the world, mankind is involved in sacred rituals associated with the equinox, spread out over about 30 days. In the West, 2 common holidays based on the timing of the spring equinox are Easter and Passover. If one nation or group of nations were to suddenly be subjected to a law against working, we can conclude that the elite in charge of that nation or group of nations had some kind of political or economic agenda. However, what is currently taking place is nearly global. Many governments around the world are participating. Even nations that are currently considered to be enemies of one another are participating in this ongoing economic shutdown. The only explanation that makes any sense is that a single individual has taken control of all of mankind's governments. In the first century, Jesus was able to do things that no other person could do. He healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and raised the dead. Thousands put their faith in him, not just because of his miraculous abilities, but also because of his way of teaching. Obviously, he received his powers from God through the Holy Spirit. It might be difficult to believe that God would grant such powers to his enemy. But in the verses that I just spoke about at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, we are told that the coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. When Satan first approached Eve, the Bible does not say that he performed miracles in order to entice her to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. The Bible only records that he used persuasion. However, in our day, Satan is not lying to a single inexperienced woman. He is lying to the whole world. He may not be healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, or raising the dead, but in some way God has given him some advantage over the pathetic people that have been put in charge of the world's governments, and by default, the pitiable followers of those world leaders. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 continues with the words, "Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness, could be distinguished." This verse does not say that God gave Satan abilities like Jesus, but he obviously is giving him some assistance. Satan was prophesied to do these things thousands of years in advance. It should be obvious that what God has promised would come to pass. Just the fact that God spoke it is a good indication that God will ensure that it happens, with or without his intervention. Satan may or may not have the kind of miraculous powers that Jesus had, but he may still be able to perform what are perceived as miracles to those who are foolish enough to put their trust in civilization. Right now, millions of people are concerned with the collapse of the world economy. As the ruler of the world, fixing the world economy would take nothing more than a wave of the hand. The economy is and always has been nothing more than a fiction. The economy is based on money, which itself has never been anything more than a fiction. Anything based on money or the economy would by default also be fictitious. As such, repairing such a thing could easily be accomplished by a similar fiction. In general, here's how the economy works. The governments issue currency to its citizens in the form of money. The government then recovers some of the money in the form of taxes, fees, and fines. For a nation to keep from incurring a national debt, all money paid out would have to be taken back. Mathematically, there are only two ways to end a national debt. The first way is to collect as much money in taxes as has ever been paid out in all of a nation's history, which of course would be impossible. The second means of putting an end to the national debt would be to simply declare all national debts forgiven. When God gave the Israelites the second law, he included a provision for exactly that. As part of the Jubilee Sabbath, all debts were to be forgiven. All family land would be returned to the families that sold it. All money borrowed would be forgotten about. Everyone who had sold themselves into indentured servitude would be released from that servitude. Back in the day, when people were obedient to this law, nobody suffered. The insanely wealthy might have to release their servants, but they would still get to keep whatever wealth their servants produced during their servitude. Those who had to return a family's land may not have as much land, but they would still have retained all of their own original family land, and they would still enjoy the benefits that they may have gotten while farming that land or raising animals on that land. In other words, the rich would still have more than the average person, and the poor would still have less than the average person. But in the end, no one would have to suffer the inescapable bonds of abject poverty. I'm telling you this now so that when it happens, when and if it happens, you will remember that I am the one that told you about it. If there is a universal canceling of all debts, it will confirm that Satan has retaken his throne, or is preparing to retake his throne, and that we are indeed experiencing a Jubilee Sabbath. Many people around the world are complaining about losing their right to work, but if you notice, there is one group that is not complaining: the world's economic leaders. As the economy that they rule over is collapsing around them, they are being noticeably silent. Jesus explained to his disciples why this would happen nearly 2,000 years ago. The account can be found in Matthew chapter 25 and verses 14 through 30. For it is like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with him. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. You ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be the weeping and gnashing of teeth. The religion of Christianity has been promoting these verses as a story about Jesus ever since its inception, when in fact this story is very obviously about the return of Satan. Ask yourself, would Jesus really use a parable about the return of a wicked ruler as a means of teaching a lesson about his own return? Keep in mind 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3. let no one deceive you in any way. For that day will not come until the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. The economic leaders of this world are not at all concerned about any losses during this economic shutdown. They seemingly know that their master has returned, and they also know that they have done well with their talents. Keep in mind what Jesus said. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Obviously, this parable describes perfectly how the world economy has worked from the very beginning. However, it would describe our current situation even more accurately than it describes economic business as usual. The world's economic leaders know that no matter what happens to the economy at this point, they will prosper. Billions of citizens of the empire have been entrusted with very little. What little they have is about to be taken away and given to those who from the very beginning were entrusted with much. The families that rule the world today are the same families who ruled the world when Satan left all those centuries ago. Keep in mind that all of the world's stock markets are based on the economy, which is a fiction. And the economy is based on money, which itself is a fiction. So by default, the stock exchange obviously can never be anything more than a fiction. As market value continues to fall, do not imagine that all of those billions of invested dollars has simply gone out of existence. They still exist, just not in the retirement accounts of civilization's working class. Those who rule over the economic systems of the nations will become richer than they have ever been, as the single talents of the working class are taken away and given to Satan's loyal servants. Those families that centuries ago were given 10 talents. As we witness the end of Satan's empire, we need to keep in mind that no matter how bad it gets for us, it will be much worse if we don't separate ourselves emotionally from civilization's political, economic, and religious hierarchies. In prayer to his Father, Jesus said this at John chapter 17 and verse 16. Father, they are no part of the world, just as I am no part of the world. The word that is translated as world at this verse is kosmao, Strong's G2889. This word can only be translated as one of two things, planet Earth or civilization. It should be obvious that Jesus was not telling his Father that his disciples were no part of planet Earth. If we want to survive what is coming upon this earth, we have to be able to separate ourselves emotionally from civilization. The collapse of civilization as we know it should not cause us any concern at all. As 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says, we ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by a spirit or by a spoken word or by something seemingly written by us, because the day of the Lord will not come until the rejection of basic truth comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed. I personally don't believe that we are currently living in a jubilee. I honestly think that much more must take place before the coronation of earth's returning king. I hope that I am wrong. I'm tired of waking up every day in a wicked world knowing that my fate is in the hands of wicked men who don't have the ability to feel compassion for their victims. However, whether or not the end time is days away or years away, it should be more than obvious that what we are living through right now is unlike any of civilization's previous campaigns against humanity. We are definitely experiencing a return of some kind of draconian Sabbath. This may just be a test run for a true sabbatical or jubilee, or it could just be one of many Sabbaths to come. All that we can do is watch and wait. Everything that we have ever known is about to change drastically. In general, people don't like change. Some things are going to get worse while other things are going to get better. But if we keep in mind that the Bible revealed to us long ago that our Lord cannot return unless Satan returns first, we should be excited. Luke chapter 21 and verse 28 puts it this way: "Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near." If we know in our hearts that Satan has indeed returned in the flesh, then we should also know that soon he will be revealed. Several verses in the Bible associate the revealing of the man of lawlessness with the return of a 360-day calendar. According to the Bible, very soon our solar system will be restored to the state that it was in at creation. Ancient stone calendars from around the world testify to a time when the sun was always in the daytime sky and the moon was always in the nighttime sky. All of those calendars from around the world prove that at one time our earth really did experience a 360-day year with 12 equal 30-day months. Even the Bible confirms what is revealed by those ancient stone calendars. Many Bible verses about the tracking of time declare that 1,260 days after the restoration of our solar system, Christ will return and replace Satan as the ruler of our planet. Billions of human beings have lived out their entire lives suffering under Satan's rulership without ever getting to witness the things that we are about to witness. Now is the time to look up, lift up our heads, and recognize that our deliverance from bondage is just around the corner. As is a verse at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verses 2 and 3, we are warned, "Be ye not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that day, the day of Christ, is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." Rather than being frightened by the return of Satan, we should be joyful. By some means, Satan has always ruled civilization. For us, his return in the flesh does not change our day-to-day lives at all. It only signals that his reign is nearing its end. Those who voluntarily participate in civilization's governmental systems, economic systems, and religious systems are very concerned with the odd changes that are taking place in society. Many are demanding laws that everyone be required to wear medical equipment in honor of Satan's Sabbath. Others are protesting the Sabbath as a threat to their constitutional rights. We need not get involved in their struggles in any way. Preserving Satan's empire or demanding changes to Satan's empire is the occupation of fools. We do not want to participate in foolishness. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.